Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of the HEMA interview series. Today I'm talking to a guy called Andy Zandy. Andy is a children's entertainer who uses magic, balloon twisting, and acrobatics to help teach and work with kids. So thanks a lot for joining me today, Andy. I've been looking forward to this just because you have such a unique market that you're working in, and you're doing something that's a lot of fun that many of us grew up with, and you've taken it to the next level and
Yeah.
bringing it to the next generation, if you will.
Yeah. Well, in many ways similar to what you do as well, which for those watching is how we first connected. Yeah, it's a fun way to make a living, to be sure, especially sharing the joy of being active with young people.
Yeah. So your company, what's your company called?
And my company is called Andy Zandy Entertainment. If anybody is listening and interested in seeing what it looks like, you can go to my website at andyzandy.com. That's ANDYZANDY.com.
Can you tell us, how did you get into, well, tell us what you do a little bit in your own words.
Sure. So, my specialty is I'm a children's entertainer, and I specialize in doing action adventure themed entertainment for kids at schools and libraries and birthday parties and corporate events that incorporates mindfulness instruction, comedy, magic, and physical comedy, fitness, stage combat, nonviolent martial arts instruction, and sometimes balloon twisting as well. So like, a good example would be if you were a 6-year-old boy who was obsessed with Star Wars, Master Andy would come to your birthday party, teach you and your friends how to meditate, move things using your minds. Then we'd do a workout. We'd learn a saber sequence, and then I would make you and your friends balloon sabers, and we would have a giant battle. So that would be like a standard kind of format for an event that I do.
I gotta admit, I would be really interested in watching a whole bunch of 6-year-olds force push something.
It's particularly cool. Especially when you can, especially with some of the psychokinetic magic effects that are out there. You can actually make things move without them touching. That's when they really flip out.
I didn't think about that because you're a magician who does close-up, and those close-up skills would transfer so nicely into helping these kids do that kind of thing.
Right. I started this as a magician. I started this as a magician when I was very young. I'm 36 now. I started doing magic like, many kids do when I was like 8 or 9. And I started doing clown magic shows for kids when I was in 4th grade.
Wow.
I had a 4th grade teacher who was very progressive and let his students do self-guided learning projects for the last quarter of the school year. So I wanted to put together a clown show, put together a clown magic show, and started getting booked pretty quickly doing kids' birthday parties, and then moved into doing from there more close-up magic for adults. And then I began doing magic on the street, more stage magic type stuff. Then I moved into doing more like escape art, stunt performance, and then and I had a music career for a while. So I've been in show business for a long time, but it's in many ways sort of a culmination of a lot of things that I've done in the past that has come around to doing this more action adventure type stuff. And the magic is really fun because it gives opportunities for comedy that are really engaging and fun for kids. And it also allows me to build a kind of rapport with kids that makes it a lot easier for them to then buy in when I ask them to do burpees with me, or ask them to sit with their eyes closed silently doing breathing exercises, things like that.
And these are such important skills that can be used for the rest of their life.
Absolutely.
When you and I met, we hit it off pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if I told you, But when I was a kid, my father was a magician and my mother was a ventriloquist.
Yeah, I
And
think I do
so
remember you sharing
I
that.
grew up on stage with magic and ventriloquism, and they were professional clowns. So I was doing balloon animals and all of that as a kid at Shakey's Pizza Parlor.
Oh
In
yeah.
so yeah, so we just hit it off at the beginning.
Yeah, no doubt.
When you're putting together your programs for the kids, uh, you have several different programs. You can do Masters at Andy as a lightsaber
Hmm.
instructor, but you also do superheroes and ninjas.
Right, and pirates as well.
Oh, and I didn't know about the
And then
pirates.
occasional other custom themes for people, including medieval knight training, which was what, for those of you listening, initially led me to train with Stephen.
And how do you put together these programs that will keep a 6 to 8 year old kid engaged like that? Because I mean, it's especially important in these days because we're stuck at home with our kids.
Right.
And we got to find a way to keep them engaged and uh, out of our hair. And we got to remind ourselves sometimes that I love that little human being. And so we need to find ways to do it. How do you come up to do that?
Sure. On the content creation side, a lot of the stuff I do on stage is stuff I do off stage as well. There's the lines between my personal life and my professional life are very blurred. So like I've always been, I have a theater degree, and ever since I was a little kid, I've always been interested in costumes and performance and things like that. So I have I have costume designers I work with, and I do some of my own costume stuff. I meditate regularly, have been meditating regularly for probably 5 or 6 years. I've been studying martial arts for probably about 5 or 6 years. I do calisthenics at home to stay in shape. I'm very active. I ride my bike a lot. And the part of me, maybe you can identify with this, the part of me that was a little boy that loved swinging sticks around, has stayed alive and well for many years afterwards. So these are all things that I do on stage and off stage as well. So when it comes to the content, a lot of it comes from my own personal practice and the people I have trained and study with and currently train and study with over the years. But when it comes to the actual sequencing, I rely on a special superpower that I have, which is I have ADHD. So my attention span is very much in alignment with the attention
So,
spans of the kids I entertain. So I think about this a lot from the I think about it a lot from the perspective of what would keep me from getting bored. I sort of assume that my orientation is similar to what my audiences would be. And so my sort of the key to doing what I do is that I switch activities constantly. Like in a magic show, a traditional magic show, you're just gonna see magic. In a juggling show, you're just going to see juggling. Yeah, you'll see different magic tricks. Yeah, you'll see different props, but it's not a full code switch. It's like variations on a theme. I do multiple code switches within a single show to keep things fresh, keep things interesting. And I apply a lot of principles I learned from being a street performer as well, specifically when it comes to being in busy environments where there's a lot of stuff competing for people's attention.
yeah.
Like I find, like at a birthday party, say, there are a lot of things competing for a small child's attention. There's balloons you can play with. There's your friends are right next to you. Mom and dad and their friends are having margaritas in the kitchen. There's, if we're doing a Star Wars party, you've got your lightsaber with you. So there's just all sorts of stuff that can vie for your attention. So another thing I try to think about, as almost as much as I do the content is the transitions between the different things that I do, and really being intentional about finding ways to make my transitions as quick and as seamless as possible. So I spend a lot of time thinking about, things like placement of my props. So I don't ever need to go digging for anything. There's never a moment of dead space. I'm always thinking. I don't usually script out the things that I do, like with the degree of precision that like theater workers often do. But the things that happen at the very end of an activity and the beginning of the next activity are always very tightly scripted, to make sure that that transition flows as seamlessly and smoothly as possible. And then I also think a lot about positive motivation and behavioral management techniques. I find that building some of these sorts of things that like school teachers do, I wouldn't be surprised if you do this in some of your work with kids as well, into my shows is also a really helpful way to keep that engagement very high.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. It's so much more than just, hey kids, let's play a game.
Right.
Yeah. Which is what, when people think about working with kids, it's like, let's play a game. Let's just have fun. Let's do something. But there's
Right.
so much more into creating that atmosphere and to draw them in.
Mm-hmm.
You also do a lot of acrobatic work, as a ninja, as a superhero, I'm sure as a Jedi. How did you get into acrobatics?
A lot of the more physical stuff I do comes from physical theater and clown training. I've never been like a circus acrobat per se, but I have a lot of physical comedy skills when it comes to doing like pratfalls or various different kinds of roles like you would find in some forms of martial arts training. I know we've done some judo role type stuff with swords before. So things like that have always been have always been in the repertoire since I went to clown school. And clown school for me was a later addition. I did some physical theater study when I was a kid, and then a little bit when I went to college and got a theater degree. But my intensive clown training came in 2014 at the San Francisco Clown Conservatory, and that was specifically a physical theater intensive. So that was 5 days a week, 8 hours a day.
Wow.
And that was when I really started to. I'd already gotten into physical training a little bit at that point in time. I had started doing some weightlifting. I'd done a little bit of yoga, but that was the point at which it really clicked for me that being physically strong and flexible and having good mobility was a huge asset in what I do, especially doing the superhero stuff that was especially popular in my business at the time. I was doing a lot of stuff in a Spider-Man suit, and I found that without my face to convey and emote, I was dramatically less funny than I was when kids could see my face, and that really bugged me. So I realized that if I could get my whole body into it, that would help a lot. So that was part of it. And then very shortly thereafter, I went to Thailand and did I went to a residential Kung Fu training camp on the side of a mountain in Thailand, run by a two-time world Kung Fu champion from the UK who had married a Thai lady and started his own Kung Fu school out there. So again, same kind of thing, intensive study, 5 days a week, 8 hours a day, plus outside training. I studied broadsword, Qigong, Tai Chi, and so got into a little bit more of the acrobatic movement stuff in there as well. And unfortunately, a lot of the venues that I perform in are not super conducive to doing things like roles or what have you. It's not uncommon that I might be in someone's living room or in like a conference room in a library where there's lots of kids. so some of the skills I have are things that I just don't get to use very often, but they're things I do on my own just for fun. Like one of the things I've been really fascinated with since quarantine hit is a lot of the high flying martial arts, like flipping kicks,
Okay.
tricking, I think is what they call it.
Yeah.
I think that stuff is fascinating and very impressive. And some of it is stuff that fits in the venues that I've been working on. So I've been spending a lot of time since quarantine hit on like hip flexibility to just to open myself up to be able to do some more of those things. Because a lot of those things are based on like crescent kicks and stuff like that. So.
And that would be, I can see how that'd be especially useful as Spider-Man
Oh, absolutely.
or as a ninja. Have you found that your training in clown school as well as the Kung Fu school has affected your everyday life outside of what you do for a living?
Definitely. Definitely. I would say a huge part of both of those things for me was just like getting into sort of a daily life schedule where physical training is a part of everyday life for me.
Yeah.
I was not athletic as a kid. I went to the performing arts largely because sports were not a place where I was ever successful. I was very small. I wasn't strong. I wasn't fast. Yeah, and I would just routinely get schooled on the playground all the time. So yeah, being a physical person, being a fit athletic person is something that came to me in like my mid-20s, really. And so that really was a big part of it. Getting into a regular routine of having like a regular mindfulness practice was also a big thing that really cemented for me during the Kung Fu training, especially. ADHD is a superpower in many regards, but it's also a liability in other regards. So being able to like train my focus and attention on a regular basis has been really important. And then I would say the other thing that's really stuck with me has been the integration of mind body training into my daily life, having spending some regular time on like internal body awareness. I didn't
Yeah.
really have a lot of body awareness beforehand. I didn't have awareness of where I was in space, how I moved, just like sensing into my own body, like doing a lot of the qigong, some of this like energy awareness stuff, this esoteric energy awareness stuff, though initially to me did feel kind of esoteric and abstract and hokey. After a while I was like, oh, I kind of get it now. I see why you do this. And and so incorporating a lot of that stuff into my daily life has been pretty big. It's really been kind of a game changer for me, and it's certainly shifted the way that my everyday life and my average week looks.
It's funny when you describe your childhood, because it's much like mine was. I was a little kid with physical problems, not able to play sports or do that kind of thing, always reading a book. And yet we've moved into, I want to change that. Picked on as a kid. I was picked on a lot as a kid. Yep. I bet you were too, especially being into magic and that kind of thing.
Oh, yeah.
And as a kid, when we're being picked on like that, it's like, this is all we see. If you could give some advice today to your 9-year-old self, what would you tell him?
That is a great question. What would I tell my 9-year-old self? I mean, I think a big one would be that you don't have to, being athletic doesn't require doing physical stuff with other people. Like a big reason that sports were never appealing to me was the way I was treated by other kids. So like when the first sport, or the first sort of athletic endeavor that I ever really got into in a serious way was cycling. My father is a lifelong cyclist, and so we used to do like long distance cycling together starting when I was in middle school, and that was something I could just do on my own. I did road bikes, I did BMXing, and that was like just me. I got into roller skating. That was something I could do that was just me. So I think one big thing I would say is, don't be afraid to be athletic on your own. There are still ways to get all the benefits of that without having to engage with other people if that doesn't feel comfortable. Now that I'm an adult, I really enjoy engaging with other people and being active. I like, kayaking with other people. I like training martial arts with other people. I ride bikes with my friends a lot. So that would be one thing. But then I think the other thing I would say to my 9-year-old self is that your differences are a strength, not a liability. And I think
That's a great answer.
I think that was really the thing that that clicked for me when I started doing clown shows and performing regularly. It's like no one gave me the time of day before I started doing shows. I was certainly not one of the most affluent kids in my neighborhood, but then I started doing shows, I started street performing, and all of a sudden I gained notoriety. I started getting paid. I instantly went from being one of the least affluent kids in my neighborhood to being the richest kid in my neighborhood overnight, just because I had a hustle that was, way more lucrative than raking lawns, or, I was able to travel. I was able to afford to travel. And like, I sent myself to Magic Summer Camp in California while all of my friends were, going to like day camp and, playing ultimate Frisbee, or, going to YMCA camp and learning how to shoot a bow and arrow or something like that. I was studying with top professional magicians from all over the country and having a great time, being my weird little self. And and that was huge for me. And that has continued to be the case, as a result of being a performing artist. I've had opportunities to travel the world. I've performed in 14 different countries or something. Like it's really been a source of freedom and adventure and mobility, and the ability to sort of live my life on my terms, rather than having to fit into some sort of standard narrative or some sort of predefined box. And I didn't understand that when I was 9, but I think it would have been much more hopeful if I had.
Yeah, and if we could tell our young selves that what you see as oddities now are strengths, and
right,
you can what other people find odd, you can leverage to be your strength to help you.
Right.
And that's a powerful message all on its own.
No doubt. Well, I mean, one of the other things that really clicked hard for me when I started getting into show business was the business part of it. I had a very strong entrepreneurial streak as a kid, in part because I was not, I was one of the least affluent kids in my neighborhood. So if I wanted something, I had to work for it. I had to make it happen. We had food on the table, for which I was grateful, but like, if I wanted toys, or if I wanted whatever, I had to make that happen for myself a lot of the time. And as I've gotten more into the study of business and entrepreneurship throughout my life, one of the things that I have seen again and again and again is you don't necessarily have to be the best in order to be successful, but it is important to be distinctive. It is important to be able to provide a kind of value that people can't get other places. And being different, being kind of weird, being kind of offbeat is actually an asset in this regard. And that was when I moved from my hometown of Seattle to the Bay Area, and was trying to figure out what my next. I had just had a music career. I had toured with a band for many years, and that had wrapped up. And I wanted to do something else, and I'd been working, crappy temp jobs and a marketing gig that I didn't like. and wanted to do something else and started getting into entertaining kids for local agencies and such, I looked around I looked at the local market and I said, well, what's everybody doing? And I said, well, there's a lot of magicians, there's a lot of clowns, there's a lot of fairies and princesses out there, but I'm getting booked to do all these action hero gigs and there's not really anybody who's doing that. And I just realized in this moment that, you know, the fact that I also just have a lot of energy, again, thanks ADHD. You know, I realized that I had something different to offer than a lot of the people entertaining kids did. You know, like the fairies and princesses were bound by hoop skirts and corsets, but I can run, I can jump, I have full range movement, and I have a lot of energy to do it, sometimes multiple times a day. So I realized really early on that if I niche myself as being really different than anybody else in town, it was going to take longer to get to the top. But once I got there, my position would be unassailable because nobody else would, you know, because no one else would be there. High barriers to entry equal low competition once you get there.
That's an amazing way to look at it. And I know I've done sort of the same sort of thing, but I think the biggest difference is mine wasn't as intentional as yours. That's an amazing touch right there.
Yeah,
And
I mean, yes.
That's actually I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying, like a book that really shifted my mindset on this was a book called The 22 Immutable Laws of Marketing. And one of the things that this book's one of the 22 immutable laws was the law of category. As it sort of went through in sort of a retrospective of business history and looked at all of the people who were first to market with something. And it sort of identified this idea that everyone wants to be second to market because somebody else has already figured out how to do it. Someone else has already made the mistakes, but then you're starting at a disadvantage because you have less of a runway and somebody else is already further ahead down the line. So it just gave all these examples of like the first company to get into a market for a particular thing. And and many times it created a category, you know, like Coca-Cola created a category, cola. And now there's all of these colas out there, but Coke is still the dominant player in the market. And and that really resonated with me and was just like, oh, if I create action hero entertainment as a thing, I'll eventually be the guy.
Yeah, that's where it becomes so important is when somebody thinks of a word, we want that word to be associated with us.
Right. Yeah, in my study of branding, which is a fascinating sub niche of marketing, they talk about that too. That a brand is a piece of mental real estate in the mind of your prospective customer. It's like your island, your little private island with a flag that you put on it, that usually has a word on it, and you know, like and in some of these first to market category building business examples. Oftentimes, the name of your company will become synonymous with the thing. Kleenex for facial tissue, Xerox for a photocopy. You know, in many parts of the country still, if you want a soda, people will be like, you want a Coke? And you'll say yes. And they'll be like, okay, what kind do you want? You know, so like that. So that kind of idea that your brand is your brand is a word in some instances, being really deliberate about the words that you choose and then trying to execute that really faithfully throughout all the ways that you present yourself to people and that people interact with you is a really great way to hammer that word into people's brains and own that piece of mental real estate.
Nice.
It is an older book, and many of the examples are of specific businesses or markets are things which are they show their age. You know, the author talks about Kodak and the sort of the film camera market, which is now not really a thing. But the examples, even though they do not age well. The lessons that these examples teach still have a lot of resonance and a lot of power. And critically, it's a quick read. You know, like each of these chapters on each one of these 22 immutable laws is like, it's like 5, 6, 7, 8 pages. It's just really like quick, easily digestible nuggets of wisdom. It's easy to skip around, and the laws are very easy to understand. You know, like the laws of primacy, the laws of category, the law of scarcity. You know, all of these things are really easy to digest and think about and implement in your own business. A big one for me recently is the work of a guy named Jay Abraham. Have you ever heard of this cat?
I have not.
Jay Abraham is like one of the world's top marketing consultants ever. He's legendary in the marketing world. He used to be in the seminar business. I've worked with a guy who trained with him, and he is he's the person that I got. I know we've talked about referral systems. I know this is something that you've built into your business. This is something that I've built into mine now. He's someone that I got he's something that I got the note about strategic partnerships with.
Yeah.
This is a really big one. And he's just, he's very clear. He's very clear about his ideas and very pointed. I've really enjoyed some of his stuff as well. So I think that'll be, especially when I get these virtual action hero training camps, that's one of the things he says is that strategic partnerships are great if your business is in any way resource deficient. And during a pandemic, when there's no regular cash flow, like a lot of businesses are resource deficient. So the strategic partnerships of being able to say, I'll kick you a percentage if you'll give me access to your email list and an endorsement to the people who know, like, and trust you.
And that actually segues really well into my next question, which is quarantine has hit a lot of us really hard.
Yeah.
Whether we work for somebody else, and even more so if we're self-employed. How have you gotten around the quarantine when you work for groups of people?
Great question. One of the things that is tricky about being self-employed is that there is less, in many ways, there is less stability. There is less predictability with it. I know you are intimately familiar with the feast and famine parts of running your own business or being self-employed. But the upside is that I can't be laid off. I can't be fired, and I can't be furloughed. And that means that I am agile in a way that an employee is not. So when I'm tied into a large community of professional variety entertainers. And so when quarantine hit, we all started putting our heads together and comparing notes and chatting with each other and with mentors, trying to figure out, like, what is our way forward. And one of the first things that I was recommended to do by a guy who's been a mentor of mine for a long time was keep in top of mind of your customers. Stay in top of mind. So the first thing I did was I just reached out to every single one, literally every single one of my past clients with personalized emails, and was just like, hey, I hope you're doing okay. I trust that you and your family are staying safe and healthy. And I also realize that this is probably a really challenging time for families. And I just, like, I know you must be struggling a little bit, and I'm sorry that's the case. And I'm working hard to try and figure out a way to deliver some value for you for free that's going to make your life easier. And then I put heads together with my trainer here in Oakland, where I live, Matt Lucas, who has a live streaming setup at his dojo. And we live streamed some free Jedi training sessions for my past clients and encouraged them to share the links around. And that turned out to actually be quite successful. The very first one I did, I had almost 400 people tune in. just from sending an email and asking folks
Wow.
to share it. And that was parents with kids. You know, none of those logins were just kids on their own. So, and a lot of parents were like training along with their kids. And I got videos of people sent me videos of kids training with me in Brooklyn, in Kansas City, in Seattle. I mean, it was pretty wild. So I did a couple of those. I managed to convert a couple of clients who I had been booked with for live events to transition to doing virtual stuff. And then from the gigs that I did there, I got inquiries for a few more. So I got 1 or 2 other paid gigs from there. The public ones that I did for free, I just posted a Venmo link on my on the page, and got a surprising amount of donations. So so it was enough to keep my head in the game and just get me some practice as to what it looks like to do my thing virtually. And
Nice.
the first thing I discovered was that without the feedback loop, without the energy loop of having an audience, it's just not the same. It's not as
really
fun.
hard.
And, you know, and again, like I have a lot of theater training. I have a lot of energy. I have a lot of solo performance experience as well. So I'm comfortable being the sole dynamo that generates energy in the room. But without that feedback loop, it's much harder to sustain, and it's much harder for me to enjoy. I can look like I'm enjoying it, but I'm not actually having as much fun. So so then I took a break for a while. I did a couple more for some paid clients, took another break, which I'm on right now. And I booked a few events in July for county library systems. So I'll be doing some virtual events for them. And and one of the things I've done, one of the critical things I've learned about doing virtual content is that doing the stuff you do live on video usually is not the complete solution. Usually there's some stuff that works live that will work on video, but most of the people I've seen out there who are really crushing it are doing a lot of stuff that has been built from the ground up specifically for virtual platforms. So a lot of the magicians I know are incorporating like green screen effects and things like this. There's a lot of people who are using more like video production, animation type stuff. And in my instance, the interactive comedy magic part of my shows, which is sometimes as much as 50% of what I do in a show, requires the audience feedback loop to work. That really, when you're doing magic for children, the magic itself, the puzzle of how did he do that, is not as important for kids as the fun stuff that happens on the journey to whatever happened. So I think about it more like playing the audience like an instrument, in much the same way that like a comedian would. And so I cut, not knowing how to do that on the internet, I just cut it out. And I said, we're just going to do mind body stuff. We're just going to meditate. We're just going to train. We're just going to do some sword work, some martial arts stuff. And it turned out that was actually a really good fit for where kids and parents were at, because kids can't go out as much right now. There's no summer camp. There's no swim team. There's no soccer team. And so, and kids are just going up the walls, especially during the early days of quarantine where people weren't going out at all.
And parents trying to figure out how to deal with it. The stress of it.
Yeah. I mean, I hear all the time from parents when I do live events, they're like, I can't believe that the kids stayed fully engaged with you for an hour plus. I can't get them to pay attention to me for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And I had this moment to realizing, oh, I have something that parents need right now. And the other thing that was interesting about this was that I went into doing these live streams with the idea that this would generate more work for me for doing virtual parties, like virtual birthday parties for kids, which is what most of my children's entertainment friends are doing right now. Most of my magician friends, they're all doing parties or sitting in on people's, company Zoom calls or whatever. But what I did not expect was that a pretty significant number of parents, close to a dozen throughout the course of my live streams, independently wrote back and said, that was great. My kid, my kid has Zoom fatigue already from doing Zoom for school and whatever, but he stayed glued to the screen for the full hour, and you gave him a positive outlet for his energy, and I got a break. Are you planning on doing a weekly thing? And I've always been like a special events guy. My whole life, I've been in the special events market. I've never been, even though there's like a teaching training component to what I do, I've never done what you do. I've never trained full time. I've never developed the expertise or the body of knowledge to have sort of a longer term curriculum. But one of my marketing mentors told me once that it is not the job of the marketer to know what the market wants. It is the job of the marketer to try stuff out and pay attention when it sticks, and listen to the market and let the market tell you what it wants from you. And
that's a really neat way to look at it.
Right. And so it just became really clear to me that like I had kind of accidentally stumbled on a format that worked well. And then, and it became really clear that like, this was what parents wanted. And initially I was really resistant to it because I primarily do upscale events. I have a high, I have high ticket prices for what I do. I'm certainly the most expensive children's entertainer in the area right now. And the idea of doing something that would necessarily have to command a lower rate was something that initially I was very resistant to. I felt like it would somehow undermine the integrity of the brand that I had built. But as I've thought about it more, I've realized that if I make one additional pivot, which is something I'd never thought about doing before, and go from doing live streamed content to pre-recorded content, that not only can I charge a lower rate without necessarily undermining the integrity of the higher rate that I charge to do my thing at your pleasure, at your time and place of choosing in person, that it also gives me the ability to reach a lot more people because I don't have to deal with things like Zoom logistics. And I also don't have to deal with things like time zones. So, by doing pre-recorded content, anybody who can understand what I am saying and is interested in the kind of stuff that I do becomes my client. And from years of studying digital marketing, I actually have enough of the chops needed to advertise and promote something like that on a larger scale, and then access to the people who I would need to tap into to fill in the gaps in what I'm either able or don't know how to do, to try and scale something like this bigger. So it's so now I'm in the very early stages of trying to build out a couple different like month-long action hero training camps that kids in quarantine can do, which can be delivered remotely in an automated fashion using an online platform called Member Vault that can then just be up there and potentially scale out my impact to a lot more families than I'm able to serve in person.
That's brilliant.
Yeah, and it's turning out to be a ton more work than I anticipated.
Yes.
Just creating content alone. I mean, like I have like a couple shows worth of stuff that I do that are I've just done them so many times that they're really tight. They're very engaging to kids because I know the rhythm. I can do them in my sleep. And now doing even like a month-long ninja training session where we're doing one training session a week. Now I have to develop 4 of those.
Yeah.
And they all have to be smooth enough for me to execute them on camera. And also I'm trying to come up with some, like supplemental activities to keep kids involved. I'm trying to, get some social justice and community engagement content in there. I'm encouraging kids to be creative and, make, do like art projects or craft projects around their training, things like that. There's graphic design, there's video editing, there's the shooting logistics. I have a new ninja costume in the works that I'm talking about. There's copyright stuff to navigate, and then I actually have to, like, not only do I have to develop the content, I actually have to do it. I have to practice all of this content to the point where I can show up and be efficient with my filming time, because I also don't have the equipment necessary to film something like this. I'm still filming at my trainer's dojo. So it also is incumbent upon me to be able to show up and be efficient with his time. There's sound design stuff to think about. All the things that you would think about for doing a high-end live show are now things that I'm thinking about in quadruplicate for 3 different formats now. So I'm tapping into a lot of mentors. Like I have a friend who teaches mindfulness to children in schools, and I'm working with her to help me develop three different sets of month-long mindfulness curricula that I can teach. I'm doing the same thing with my trainer. Yeah, so that's sort of what it's looking like right now.
One of the things I really like about what you do is that you're not doing just children's entertainment. You're not just making these kids laugh. You're actually giving them things that they can use in their life to help the way that they interact with others now and in the future. And you're really giving them something that they can sink their teeth into and take from what you're doing.
Absolutely. Well, and these are things that have been really important to me as well. So like, I just, I know you get it too. I know that the value of being active and being in tune with your body and being aware of how you interact with other people are also parts of what you do. And there's so many applications for these meta skills, in daily life. And, I don't pretend to be able to teach a 6-year-old about mindfulness in an hour, but I feel like, if I can plant a seed and just nurture it a little bit, give them some practice, some awareness of the ways that you can learn to regulate and govern yourself, that could very well pay dividends. And certainly even a little bit of that right now is more than most parents are able to do.
Right. And that, once we get out of this quarantine, so easily transfers when they go back to school.
Right. Absolutely.
Because now they're going to be sitting in at their desk in school again, and they really need to find a way to be able to control that and control themselves. It's like I tell everybody in the martial art, when we're looking at the combative art, you can never control another person until you first learn how to control yourself.
Word.
Right? And
Couldn't have said that.
Everything starts right here.
Mm-hmm.
And nothing will get out here to the other people until you can control this.
Right. Well, I've also found that this is a, sort of my selling point when I do parties is, because I have this sort of unique, action-oriented thing, the main fear that parents have at like a birthday party is that the kids are going to get hopped up on sugar, run amok, and destroy the house. So my selling pitch for special events is I will tire your kids out. I will give them a positive outlet for their energy and wear them down so much that they'll be way easier for you and the other parents to deal with when I hand them back over to you. But in this situation, the selling point, sort of my personal selling point, the things that I can't really sell to a parent at birthday parties, I think it's beneficial for kids to learn mindfulness and have positive experiences of being active and moving their bodies that they can attach to these like pop culture tropes that they're so excited about. All of a sudden becomes a major selling point for parents. It's like your kid is climbing up the walls and driving you crazy. Your kid is also probably scared, anxious, frustrated, confused as to why all of this is happening, perhaps. And if I can offer a way for your child to maintain their mental and emotional health, as well as stay physically active and have that, outlet for their energy, so hopefully they will climb up the walls a little bit less. that delivers a huge benefit to parents that, again, most parents are just not equipped to provide. You know, most parents don't have this kind of expertise in engaging young people that you and I do in you know, in physical things. And I think it really makes a difference right now.
And I think things like you're doing, like I try to do, what we're offering is something that is also very beneficial for the parents, because right now we're seeing that people are spending so much more time together than they're ever used to spending with their
Yeah.
family members. And this excessive time with your loved ones is very difficult for people.
Yeah.
Right? We go to work for 8 hours, then we come home and we see our family for 3 or 4 hours before we go to bed. Now all of a sudden, all day, every day, and we can't go anywhere, so we're stuck. So what you're giving them is a break, a
Absolutely.
mental break, which I think you're using the physical aspect to support the mental and emotional side.
Right.
It's so important.
Well, and I think there's an engagement thing here too. Like, I know this from being an ADHD kid. I can't sit still for 5 minutes. I'm constantly on the move. I'm constantly fidgeting, playing with stuff, realizing that there's something I forgot that I need to do. And I think parents are always surprised when I'm doing my thing that kids will stay engaged with me for so long, because they're not trying to engage their kids physically when they're trying to get their kids to pay attention. But with the stuff I do and the stuff you do, when kids are physically engaged and they have somewhere for that energy to go, they have a channel for it to sort of flow into, all of a sudden it's a lot easier to pay attention. And I think that's really super important as well for times like this when kids don't have as much of an outlet. You know, kids need stimulation, they need stuff to do. And if you're just trying to plop them in front of a screen and expect them to sit there all day, of course they're going to get Zoom fatigue. I can barely sit still and watch an entire movie, you know? So like, I really like, on an intuitive level, I have some understanding about the challenges that parents are dealing with, and also how important it is for parents who are also not only spending a lot of time with their kids, but now having to like integrate oftentimes their work life at home with their kids. Like, how do you carve out time to, like, you know, focus on doing something on your computer or being on a call with your coworkers when you have this like tiny understimulated, you know, human having all these feelings about being coped up at home and not being able to do the stuff you like to do and not being able to see your friends, and why is this all happening, bothering you constantly? You know, I feel like it's a really it's a really good opportunity. Doing any sort of mind body stuff that kids can engage with is a really great way to serve everyone in a family now.
And it's wonderful what you're able to do and how you're able to help all these families. And I know from my perspective, I love talking to you because there's so many cool and great ideas that I get whenever I get the opportunity to talk to you. So I love doing it.
Likewise.
And you're also just a nice guy.
I try.
How long have you been in this industry? But when did you find that you really went professional?
Well, I started getting paid right away. I also come from a theater and music family, so I've just like been around this for a long time. So like I did my first paid recording session when I was 8. I did my first paid magic gig when I was 11.
Wow.
You know, and then I started playing jazz when I was in middle school, and by high school I was getting paid to play at weddings. I play upright bass and I sing. And then I started street performing when I was in middle school as well, and getting paid to do that. So I've really been business focused about this since I was a kid, and I think certainly the time that I really committed to it was right around right around high school was when I started making real money.
Okay.
Real money, doing jazz gigs and street performing. Like it wasn't uncommon for me to do like a weekend of street shows towards the end of high school, and make $1,500 or $2,000 in a weekend, which relative to my friends who are working at like an ice cream parlor or a coffee shop it was a full order of magnitude more income. And then I paid my way through a lot of college performing as well, mostly street performing. So that was big, but I would say like, but I was still in school at the time. So I wasn't like really full timing it. But as soon as I got out of school, I'd started playing with a band in college while I was wrapping up my theater degree that kind of inadvertently became successful. And I actually graduated early so that I could start touring with this band. And that was really when I had my first legitimate, I was part of my first legitimate 6-figure performing arts business enterprise.
Wow.
And that was, and we did that full time for a few years. And that was everything my 14-year-old self had ever dreamed of when I picked up a bass. And yeah, and I got really into the marketing and promotions end of that. That was kind of my role in the band, and so I really got into that. That was in the very beginning days of social media. So I got into doing social media marketing really early on. And then I would say when I moved to the Bay Area again, I had about a year or so where I was just like working jobs trying to make ends meet. I was pretty broke. And then got into entertaining kids for agents for maybe another year or so, and sort of got my sea legs under me again. And then at that point in time, I realized that the percentage that my agents were taking was absolutely ridiculous by any other standards of the entertainment industry I'd participated in up until that point in time. It was highway robbery. And I looked at what they were doing, and I learned a little bit about the local market, and I learned more about digital marketing, and figured out what the infrastructure was that I needed to have in order to do that. And I would say that was the point where I really drank the Kool-Aid, where I really said, okay, I've, like having been in this band where, we like had a web presence, but I wasn't necessarily responsible for that part of it, where we had, solid accounting, but I wasn't responsible for that. That was the moment when I started Andy Zandy for reals. That was the moment where I said, okay, I've been around all of this stuff for a while. I've seen how all of these pieces fit together at this point through the various markets and industries and gigs that I've done. And so I would say it was probably around 2011, 2012 that I said, okay, I'm going to take on the challenge of managing all of these things and doing all of this myself, and becoming the octopus in the middle, becoming the head of the octopus with an arm in all these different things, and really try as much as I can to do it all myself and figure out how to manage the books and the marketing and the web presence and do the graphic design and the video editing and the copywriting and the sound design and the content creation, and figure out what the training regimen looks like, and client relations and all of this stuff. And it has turned out to be a lot more than I anticipated it was going to be, and I've had to pull in a huge number of mentors in order to pull it off just on my own, and outsource a lot. Like I have an assistant, I have a booking manager that I hire, I have a lot of people who do graphic design and video editing and project management stuff for me. But the trade-off, even though it's much more challenging and it all falls apart if I let my foot off the gas, is that now I can be in charge of my own destiny, and I can, and there's not a lot of ceiling really on what I can do moving forward to have this be my, the way I make a living.
The things that strike a chord with me, with what you just said, when we get into running our own business, we realize there's a lot of hats to wear.
Oh, yeah.
But no matter how good you are at what you do, find a coach, find a mentor, find somebody who's already been down a road like the one you're on that can help train you. That, more importantly, can keep you focused on that road and not taking all these side paths that run into dead ends.
Yeah.
You've got all these hats to wear, but that doesn't mean you have all the hands to do the work.
Oh.
You need to find people that can help you do that work. And one of my mantras, the thing I love to say is, I will get what I want by helping you get what you want.
Yeah.
And I'm not very good at math, but I know
me
people that enjoy math. So I'm going to work with them and I'm going to give them what they want, and they enjoy doing this stuff that I despise. And so they're perfectly happy to help me.
Mm-hmm.
So even though you're wearing all these hats, don't try to have all the hands.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I have a few friends in the industry who I really look up to, and one of them is a guy who's who's traveled the world being a professional beatboxing bounce juggler, among other things. He's a multi-instrumentalist. He plays like 14 different instruments or something. Wow. Also has circus training. He's just like a force of nature to be reckoned with. And I asked him early on in my career, I was like, how do you do that? Like, how do you do all these different things at the same time? And he was like, mentors, bro. Yeah. Mentors. That's it. When I want to learn something, I find someone who's better at it than me, and I invest in, and I invest in that. And that was a big one for me. It was like, was really, and I think this is especially the case as as a millennial, as a digital native, that we grow. Me and a lot of my friends, having grown up with the technology that allows us to do things like video editing and graphic design and web design, all these things, like, fairly accessible, especially as relatively simple platforms have now come out to do it. I think there's a common belief I see that because we can do it all ourselves, that we should do it all ourselves. And I think that really hangs people up a lot. It's a lot cheaper to do it that way, but it's a lot slower to do it that way as well. And I think for me, a big switch was getting out of the DIY mindset, that like, I don't actually have to know how to do everything. I just need to know enough about what needs to be done to be able to communicate with the person who can do it in their language, so that I can ask really specifically for what I know I need. Because other people don't necessarily know what my business requires, but I do. So it's really only incumbent on me to be a communicator of my needs rather than an executor of my needs. And that was a huge turning point for me, I think.
That's an amazing way to say it too. I need to be a communicator more than an executor.
Right. And just like having a basic understanding of how things work.
I'm going to take this to more of a military style, but what we're talking about is being the general.
Yeah, absolutely.
The specialists are the captains and the majors. They need to know their job. They need to know how to do this thing, and this is the thing they do. But as the general, you need to be able to see the overall picture and know which captains and majors to pull in for this job.
Right. One of the most impactful books that I've ever read about entrepreneurship is called The E-Myth Revisited: Why Most Small Businesses Fail. And what it identified is that a lot of people who start small business, this was another book that really changed my thinking about business and really got me on the track to starting to outsource and delegate more stuff. Start out as technicians, people who are really good at doing a thing. The example that the book gives is you make great pies, and your friends are like, you should start a pie shop. Or like, Steven, you are great with swords. You should start a sword fighting school. Or Andy, you are great at engaging children. You should start a children's entertainment business. And that's the expertise that people come into a business with. But when they start a business, there are also two other roles in addition to the technician that you have to fill. One of them is the managerial side of things, and the other one is the owner operator side of things. And I sometimes think about this in military terms as well, of like the owner operator is the general who's important for the top-down strategy. Where is the army going? What is the army going to do? And then the general has to communicate to the captains and the majors, be like, all right, here's what they need to do. You need to make it happen. You need to execute and manage the larger strategy. And then the captains and majors get all the way down communicating to the foot soldier level. And they say, all right, men, here's what you need to do. Here's how you're going to do it. And the foot soldiers go out and they execute the plan. So basically what the book says is most people who start businesses are great foot soldiers, or maybe they have the capacity to be good foot soldiers and good managers, but not good owner operators, setting the strategic vision for the business. Or maybe they're great, or maybe they're great visionaries. They have a great idea of what the strategy and the thing is that they need to do. And they have an idea of how it needs to be executed, but they're not necessarily the people to actually make it happen. And so what I realized really early on reading this book was that I am a great foot soldier, I am a great general, but I am a crappy captain. I am a really crappy captain. That the managerial load of having to balance all the different pieces that I have my hands in is where I most frequently stall out. So that for me was the impetus in making probably the second big shift for me or in outsourcing and delegating, which was not just hiring other technicians to do, the technical things that I could do but don't want to do or I'm not good at, like graphic design or video editing, stuff like that. But being willing to invest in more expensive, more specialized people to handle the managerial project ownership, project management side of my business, and bringing people in at a higher level, a higher strategic level, and being willing to work with people who I could then turn loose on my projects and say, okay, can you make this happen? Or in many instances, can you manage me? This was a big one. It's like, can I sit in a strategy meeting with you with my general's cap on and say, all right, I know what needs to happen. And they can say, great, I'm going to write down everything that needs to happen. And then I take my general's hat off and I put on my foot soldier cap and I say, all right, Captain, I'm reporting for duty. What do I do today?
Yeah.
You hold the big picture for me so I don't have to. So I can focus on the minutia that I can still do or that I like to do. Like I still do all my own copywriting because I really like it and I'm good at it. But I can't copyright and manage and maintain the big picture at the same time. So that's been a huge, huge shift for me that book sort of brought about.
One of the things I like to tell people I'm really good at is finding people.
Yeah,
I'm really good at finding people. And that's a skill that we need to help other people recognize in themselves as well. It's not about me.
Right.
It's about the people I can work with.
I remember reading some quote from a past U.S. president, maybe it was Woodrow Wilson, I can't remember exactly, who said something to the effect of like the job of being president is not about being the smartest person in the room. The job of being president is collecting all of the smartest people into a room with you and being in dialogue with them.
Yeah.
And that one is really,
And being able to listen.
Right. Right. Well, I think one of the things that I've tried to embrace is like especially as like an entertainer, like I have a particular like flavor of stage presence, a particular way that I am on stage, a particular kind of energy that I put out that people like and people have come to expect. So I'm the expert on how I do the stuff that I do, but I'm not necessarily the expert on what I do. I'm not an expert mindfulness coach. I am not an expert swordsman. I am not an expert martial artist, you know, like the guy who's helping me develop training, training sequences for my ninja thing right now, has, you know, his dad was special forces and he's been training with like high level professional warriors since he was 3. You know, I mean, he's 43, so he's got 43 years old and he's been, you know, like working with the Defense Department. I mean, he's just like one of these crazy high level Yoda guys. I will never pretend to be that guy. But if I can pay that guy a couple $100 to help me develop something for children that's going to be engaging, that's going to deliver better value than anything I could come up with, like, yeah, I do have the internet. I could probably go on YouTube and find people who are doing something kind of like that and hack something together, but like, they're not going to be able to tell me how to teach it. They're not going to be able to help me sequence it in a way that's going to deliver actual value. And there's still going to be a lot of flailing. So for me, the ability to embrace the time versus money continuum and say sometimes it is more beneficial to pay an expert to help you than it is to try and spend all the time to figure out how to do it yourself, that really greases the skids for efficiency and productivity and helps things move forward a lot.
Listening to that, I had a John Wayne scene flash through my mind. When a kid tells him that he doesn't know how to swim, and so he chucks him in the middle of the river. I can either pay somebody to teach me how to swim, or I can jump in a river.
Yep.
And flail around until I figure out how to swim, or I sink. It's
right.
way better to find a swim coach to teach me how to do it.
Absolutely.
This has been amazing. I've really enjoyed talking with you, Andy. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me and for everybody watching this.
Absolutely, Stephen. Thanks for having me on.
It's been amazing. I learned so much every time I talk to you, and I'm really looking forward to spending more time talking with you, learning from you, and sharing what I've got with you.
Likewise, man. Likewise. It's always a pleasure.
So thank you very much. Have
Thank
a wonderful day. Stay safe, stay sane, and we'll see you on the other side of this.
Sounds good, Stephen.
That was so great to talk to you, Andy. Thank you for spending the time with us. I can talk with you for hours. Really appreciate all your knowledge and your willingness to share with us. If you enjoyed what you saw today, please hit the subscribe button below. Go ahead and subscribe to our channel and hit the little notification icon. We have lots of different videos on the channel. We have interviews like this one. We also have a lot of classes in different weapon styles that you can watch. Thanks for joining us, and stay safe out there.